The next issue that our authors take us through is relationship between apologetics and science, right? And so what is the relationship between these two perspectives and disciplines? And they say that classical apologetics generally try to maintain a balanced view of science, so neither uncritically endorsing it nor hypercritically rejecting it. They believe, the classical apologists believe that apologists should seek to show that Christianity is consistent with scientific facts, and that this usually, though not always, includes comparing what Christianity says about the world and mankind with what current scientific theories have concluded. But notice, scientists can be wrong. And so the way science is applied by both scientists and non-scientists often leads to error. And so what this means then is that Christians should be cautious, right? And this is the approach that these classical apologists take. Christians should be cautious about endorsing current scientific theory too uncritically as scientific theories change, right? And so there's a warning there. Yes, you want to embrace science to a certain extent, but you don't want to embrace it uncritically because theories change. And so, you might be left on a limb that's been sawed off, right?
Right.
So.
Right. And for our YouTube overlords, we mean past science. We don't mean current science. Current science is not flawed. Currently, all things that scientists have said right now are absolutely true, and they will definitely not change like they have in the past two weeks or so. So yes, that's true. But here we can harken back to things like geocentrism, and we can say, oh, Christians were so easily to embrace geocentrism because the idea was, well, God of course is going to create imperfect spheres, and so all you just need to have is spheres upon spheres, and that's the model. So how many spheres there are, and whether there's ether in the way, that's a question that can be talked about among the sciences, but we definitely can't question the spheres. Except then there are these things called wanderers in the sky that seem to overturn the model, and science goes through this period of revolution, and that seems to be the case for our scientific conclusions. In fact, we could postulate from Newtonian mechanics to relativity, and then even from relativity to string theory, and then whatever might be next, because it seems like small things and big things in the universe we have a hard time with figuring those things out, and so all this might overend. And so when we hitch our wagon and say, this is how God created with string theory, and then it's overturned, well, then doesn't that hurt our witness? And are we saying that this has to be the case, that this science must be true, and to overturn it, then we're going to be outside the realm of truth and into worse than dogma at that point? That's the warning that's being attributed here. Well, Geisler, while finding much value in the scientific evidence for the creation and design of the universe and for the creation of life and mankind, is cautious about overstating the case. He says that since science is limited and progressive, we should not expect complete agreement in every detail with the biblical presentation. However, the amount of present agreement is striking. So again, if God is a God of order, what will we see? Will we see things done orderly in the universe, in the supposedly chaotic universe where an explosion has created everything, and it's rained on the rocks for millions of years, and a lightning struck it and turned the ooze into something that can be single-celled and then turned into multi-celled, and then the fish grows legs and finds a mate that's somehow within the hundreds of miles that it is, and it also evolves into asexual to sexual reproduction, and then dinosaurs, and then back to chickens, and then all these things. So, are we saying that can't be the case? Well, Geisler is saying we have to be careful with always being in agreement with that. However, there seems to be an amount of order within the universe that we can attribute to a God of creation. And again, that's what classical argument from this first leaping off point of saying there is a God And then the second one is, okay, exactly who is that God? And again, those things might overlap as well. But that's where some classical apologists will make their case.
Right. And so the next reference, J.P. Moreland, I think now he's still teaching out there in California at Biola and whatnot.
Still going, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he might be an emeritus professor now. But anyway, he's for many years engaged in the most sophisticated analysis, they tell us, by any classical apologist of the nature of science and of its relation to Christian theological truths. And so they suggest that the burden of Moreland's extensive research and writing on science and Christianity can be summed up in 4 headings. And so they're going to walk us through each one of these 4 headings.
Right.
So why don't you start us off?
Well, of course, the first one is that he argues against naturalism and especially scientism, that science can legitimately be practiced within the framework of a theistic worldview. Scientism is the belief that science alone yields genuine knowledge or truth. And J.P. Moreland argues that scientism is self-refuting because the claim that science alone produces truth is not learned scientifically, right? You're not titrating the scientific method out of a test tube. It's a procedure. It's a way that we find the truth, but it's not. It of itself does not produce the scientific method.
Right.
So
it's a philosophical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a philosophical claim about science. Right. It's not a scientific claim.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So he documents extensively the various sorts of limits to science that preclude any sort of scientism.
Right. And so first he then argues against naturalism and specifically scientism, because scientism says, only science produces truth. Well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Do you have a study for that?
Yeah. We get truth in all kinds of ways, and the claim itself is self-refuting, right? Secondly, they point out that Moreland urges caution in assuming a naivety with regard to realist views of science. So there's a distinction between realism in terms of how you view scientific theories versus some type of pragmatic or instrumentalist approach, right? And so the realist says, well, what scientific theories are supposed to do is to give us truth about the world. The entities that they posit really do exist, those types of things. So that's a realist approach. Science gives us real truth about an external reality, the world that exists. The instrumentalist, on the other hand, says, well, what is this notion of why are you worried about truth? As long as the theory works, right, as long as it produces results and helps us to predict and explain, that's all we need. We don't need to say that it's, it gives us truth about the world. So that's the distinction here that Moreland is trying to make here. And so what they say is Moreland urges caution in assuming a naively realist view of science. So although he thinks scientific theory should be understood along realist lines, right, that it gives us the truth and that sort of thing, in the absence of sufficient evidence to the contrary, he cautions that in some instances we should be reticent to grant that a scientific theory describes reality as it actually is, right? So he said he hedges his bet here. Yes, generally speaking, science and scientific theories are aiming to give us the truth, and they often do, but we need to be careful because sometimes they don't. And so an instrumentalist view might be helpful. So notice, if the theory attempts to explain, he argues here, in totality, a phenomena that lies outside the proper domain of science, or if it conflicts with a rationally well-established conclusion about reality, then the theory should be viewed as a construction that does not describe reality itself. So then we can move over into the instrumentalist view about science. Well, it may not be giving us the truth, right, about reality, but it's helpful, and it allows us to make predictions and that sort of thing. And so we can use the theory as long as it does that until a better one comes along. So that's this second notion that Moreland So be cautious, he's suggesting, about the realist view of science. Yes, in general, that's the aim of science, but sometimes theories don't do that.
Right. So who knew science was so complicated? And again, this is the reasonable faiths, and so the classical model focuses on reason, and so of course they're going to critique any kind of view of scientific one-upsmanship here for being under the purview of reason and logic. Okay, we've done two. The third one is that Moreland explores the various models for relating science and theology and explains why the two fields should be viewed as overlapping, over against those who would protect religion or faith from science by regulating theology to the realm of values and spiritual matters. We only talk about theology on Sundays. We do our science on Monday through Friday, and then everyone gets a day off on Saturday. Well, nope. He says that instead of regulating those two, the realm of values and spiritual matters, he insists that theology does deal with some aspects of the physical world, such as the creation by God, right? Genesis 1. Let's start there. What happens in the beginning? God creates. Oh, okay. Well, now all of a sudden we have to do science. We have to figure out how the world operates and exists, and how we can harness it. And so by those questions right there, we're already through Genesis 1 through 3. Well, thus, science and theology really do interact on common ground, and effort must be made to reconcile or integrate science and theology. You can't just have their own spheres. They must be in some way overlapping, simpatico, in relationship to each other.
All right. So notice what we have here. We've seen now at least three approaches with regard to the relationship between science and religion, we might say, or Christianity, right? First approach was this conflict approach, where they, are at odds with one another, right? The second approach, which Moreland here criticizes, is this approach that says, no, they're really not at conflict because they are dealing with separate aspects of the world or of reality. Science with facts and religion with values. So that's a second approach, right? This kind of separate approach that each one takes. Moreland doesn't agree with either of those two approaches, that they're in total conflict or that they totally separated in terms of what they deal with. His suggestion is, no, there's an interaction between science and religion and Christianity. And so we should use both to help us to get a full-orbed picture of the way the world is, right? So this interactionism or integration, we might say, is what Moreland is arguing for here in this third position. All right, and then finally, Moreland argues that creationism, right, can be a legitimate idea within the discipline of science. And so this is a really big claim. This actually has been argued in court, at least two major arguments in court, one in Arkansas, the other in Pennsylvania. And in both cases, design was being asked to be part of the scientific curriculum. And folks were arguing, no, it's religion and not science, right? And so Moreland argues that creationism can be a legitimate idea within the discipline of science. His main contention here is that science should not be defined in such a way as to exclude creationism a priori, right? That is, we don't even consider it from the discipline of science. His approach to science well illustrates the central method of classical apologists. His objections to scientism and naturalism, as well as to definitions of science that exclude creationism, focus on the question-begging and self-defeating nature of these positions, right? So notice Moreland would argue something like this. If you say, well, for instance, that this idea that there was a designer that created the universe based on the observations that we made. Well, there are folks that argue, no, you can't say that because that's religion and not science. when we're dealing with science. And Moreland argues, no, not what we should be doing with regard to science is coming up with the best explanation, whether or not the scientists agree with it or not. What is the best explanation for our observation? And if the best explanation is a designed universe that implies a designer, then that should be part of a scientific explanation. It is the best explanation, and that's what science is after. So that's kind of this fourth point that they're trying to make here with regard to Moreland and his arguing that creationism can be a legitimate idea within the discipline of science.
Right. Or you just have to argue that there's been no scientific breakthroughs until the Enlightenment or Darwin or I don't know, the 1900s, and clearly that's not the case. Okay, we've kind of hit various points, but now we're on to revelation confirmed in history. Okay, so we're applying the classical model of apologetics that Christianity has some sort of role in our history. According to the Classical Apologist, history is important to apologetics because it is in history that God has revealed himself. As Warfield explained, Christianity is not a religion of ideas that is of some timeless, eternal varieties, but it's rather a religion of fact. To show that Christianity is rational, then, it is necessary to show that God has revealed himself in history, specifically as recorded in Scripture. Again, people kind of want to have a pick and choose variety. Confucianism and Jesus kind of sound similar, and those are kind of good philosophies to live by. You live at peace with people, and so I'm just going to take that. And there's truth. It's kind of it works model. That's not what Christianity is. In fact, without being rooted in history. Those things are just fortune cookie things that you find in our American-made processing plants for our Chinese food. That's even an American invention there. But logically, before that can be shown, one must know that it is possible for God to have revealed himself to show us in history. At this point, the modern apologist confronts the question of whether historical knowledge is even possible.
Right. So the issue here is, what's the relationship between apologetics and history? And the problem here is that, often, sometimes anyway, history can be seen as some type of subjective way of viewing the past, where I pick out the various events that I want to explain. Right. And so it's very, it's very subjective, and there's no objective view with regard to history. And so what they tell us is that Geisler, for instance, addresses the supposed subjectivity of historical knowledge by arguing that scientific knowledge is conceded to be possible despite its subjective dimensions, right, of the scientific enterprise. Mm-hmm. So even scientific knowledge has subjective dimensions. Scientists choose what area they're going to cover, and they pick out, the various theories that they think they want to examine and confirm and that sort of thing. So we might say, well, science is subjective as well, right? So there are dimensions of subjectivity in science as well as in history, right? And so they suggest that Geisler admits that no human historian can be objective if this is defined to mean possessing absolute knowledge.
Right.
But historians can have an objective view of the past if this is understood to mean, quote, a fair but revisable presentation. So you can have, to a certain extent, an objective view of the past. It isn't all subjective, as long as you work it like you do a scientific theory, right? Here's my theory of the way things are, but it's subject to being revised based on more facts coming into the issue.
Right. Who started the Civil War? Was it those who fired the first shot, or those that goaded them into it? And so You have to evaluate. You have to be willing to be revised on it. And there are some people who write that big historical book that gets them all the accolades, and they don't want to move from that position. And someone comes along and challenges that position. It's hard for the historian who has the accolades to kind of put that aside, because that's what they've made their name to. And what does that say about their next big work if the amateur historian finds that no, it was actually this other side that fired the first shot, and that's what kicked off everything. And so it's knocked down the main historian's tower, and he can't show his face again, or he can't sign those books anymore, because it's all false. So we talked about this in How to Be an Atheist, which Mick Stokes, about how we have to be careful when we say scientists say, or the science says. It says, well, no, scientists say, and so scientists should also be willing to kill their theories. And that's really sometimes hard for people. Sometimes people hold on to those theories their entire lifetimes and are shown again and again to be incorrect, in the hopes that it'll come around and they'll be shown to be correct. And so historians have that same built-in flaw as well. And we're all people, and sometimes it's hard for us to admit that we were wrong, especially when we publish things. Well, Geisler denies that the facts speak for themselves. If this is taken to mean that the facts bear only one meaning, and they bear it evidently. He agrees that there is no so-called bare facts, but insists that the meaning and facts bear is assigned to them by minds and do not emanate from the facts themselves. Again, you can look at the battlefield, you can see one way or the other how things turn out, but like our presuppositional model, it's what the mind does to interpret those facts, and to call something good or negative is depending on what's known and gathered as evidence under a worldview position. And Geisler is making that point here for our historians.
Right. So notice what Geisler is saying. He's suggesting that the objectivity of all knowledge of facts, including knowledge of history, rest on the truth of the theistic worldview. Now, how is that the case? How does it rest on the view, right? The truth of theistic worldview. Well, he says if God exists, then all facts are what they are because God says so, right? Because he can view all of the history and present and future at the same time. And we have a true, if that's the case, right, we have a true and objective knowledge insofar as we accept the meaning of the facts as given by God. So God gives us the objectivity with regard to, history. So arguments for the theistic worldview then come logically prior to arguments about historical facts. Since our objective knowledge of those facts depend on our considering them within the context of the correct worldview, right? So yes, subjectivity, we can morph into subjectivity when we're looking at various historical facts, right? But we can eliminate that if we have the proper worldview. And Geisler is suggesting here that the theistic worldview, the perspective that God gives us, allows us to have objectivity in history. So that's so what is the relationship between apologetics and history? Well, we defend the fact that God exists, and as a result of that, we can have a objective view of history because we can view history from God's perspective as he reveals it to us.
Okay, and then one of our final ones that we cover is proof from experience. So how does our experience inform from our classical approach the truth of Christianity? Classical apologists do not build their case from theism primarily on religious experience. However, they recognize that the Christian faith does not call people merely to believe that God exists, but rather to experience a personal relationship with God. Thus, if theism is to be defended as a more than academic theory, it is necessary to defend the fidelity and rationality of religious experience. For this reason, classical apologists take pains to argue that it is rational to believe that people can have experiences of God and that these experiences can result in immediate knowledge of God. And so, if you're talking about your miracles, if you're talking about your near-death experiences, those things can be logically based as well as evidentially based as well.
Right. And so they give us an example here of Geisler again, right, in his book, Philosophy of Religion. He offers three main arguments in defense of religious experience. The first one is that religious experience is unique, right? And that it differs radically from moral or, for instance, aesthetic types of experience. So religious experience is different than other kinds of experience, moral experiences and such. So first, religious experience is unique.
Right. Well, and then second, the religious impulse, if not religious experience per se, is universal. Classical apologists contend that the universality of religious experience across centuries and cultures points to a basic human drive towards self-transcendence. Now, near-death experience tends to be more kind of in the evidential camp, but this kind of universality of time, culture, and different types of experiences when it comes to near-death experience has caused people to study it as a thing of history, as a scientific study point, and trying to conclude whether or not these experiences are true. But this kind of universal nature across both time and culture seems to bolster the claims that NDEs are a thing that is happening to us. And so scientists and philosophers can disagree, whether it's chemicals released from the body that we're all experiencing, or it is some type of kind of universal concept that points back to religion. But something is happening, and so the classical model could focus in on this. Well, classical Christians apologists affirm that to be real, this transcendental urge must be more than just a subjective progression or wish fulfillment. It must have objective and independent basis in something. So, you interview the woman. She was dead on the table. She floated above her body, she reported, and she reported that a child's drawing was on top of the cabinet that no one could see. She falls back into her body. She recovers, and she tells the doctors about this. They say, no, absolutely not. There's no way that picture is there. Get a ladder, go up, and sure enough, there's the picture. Okay, there's something objective and independent based on that. It's not just, I felt like I was floating. There's something objective there, and we do have those types of experiences recorded. All
right. Good. So first, religious experience then is unique, right? It's different from other kinds of experience. Secondly, it's universal, right? It's been across cultures and centuries and that sort of thing. And then thirdly, they argue that religious experience is too ubiquitous to be explained away, right? So it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Geisler reasons that the evidential value of religious experience can only be discounted by making the radical claim that every person in the history of the world who claimed to have a religious experience has been totally deceived. There. And, obviously this would be an erroneous and onerous claim to prove. And so the conclusion that some reality exists that corresponds to the universal need for transcendence then still stands. And thus, notice there must be a basis in reality for at least some religious experience. In fact, for if even one religious person is right about the reality of the transcendence, then there really is a transcendence, right? So we have, it's universal, it's ubiquitous, and it is, unique, and therefore it's something that we can't dismiss. Is right. The idea here. Right.
Right. And the other side can say, well, even Muslims have religious experience, even Buddhists have this kind of universality of experiencing a period outside their body. okay, let's grant that fact, but now we're having a conversation within a smaller subset to say, all right, things are happening and we have to explain them. So again, the classical model gives us a place to sit at the table and talk about these type of experiences, and whether or not they can all be explained away with a swipe of a hand would be difficult, but it's something that that has to give us pause, that offers an explanation to, just like how we can't discount the planet wanderers out there in our spherical model for geocentrism. There might be a case where sure enough, those out of body experiences could point to the existence that God is real. Now, what God is that? We're now on to a different question, but we're just talking about the facts of religious experiences. All right. Well, finally, in his debate with atheists, William Lane Craig routinely ends his opening statements by affirming that human beings cannot only know about God's existence, but can also know God by experience. However, he cautions this isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it is a claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments, simply by immediately experiencing him. From those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. His purpose in citing the experience of God, then, is not to hold forth my experience as evidence to others of God's existence, but invite others to experience God. So again, if you watched Stephen, I'm gonna blank on his name, Stephen Myers on the Joe Rogan Experience, and Joe Rogan asked him about why he was a Christian personally, and Stephen Myers, who wants to talk about kind of creationism or intelligent design, routinely said that he had a personal religious experience, but wouldn't hold those experiences up to people as reasons why to believe, but they're reasons why he does believe. And so if you want to kind of see what Craig is talking about in this type of setting of not a debate, but a conversation, that was a good episode that Stephen Myers, who I always enjoy listening to, was a part of there.
Yeah, good. All right. So we've walked through now these various 6 questions with regard to the apologetics relationship. First, it's a relationship to truth, and then theology, and then philosophy, and then science, and finally, historical inquiry and religious experience. And they've shown us now the perspective of the classical apologists with regard to these various questions. And so the next chapter, what they're going to do is get into the arguments that the classical apologists use to defend Christianity. So that should be an exciting one and a helpful one.
Right. Again, there's a reason that we picked this book. It's a reason that we read it the first time. And so hopefully you are picking up this book, and the links are in the description below, both on our video and then in the audio podcast, and then on our website, cavetotthecross.com, where if you go there, you can find all the books that we talked about. Just go to kind of the middle of the page. It's right underneath all the links. You can click on the book or the interview tab, and there it's going to take you to that book and everything that we've done a part of it. There's all the short clips that are available there as well. We've been putting out reels because it was something I wanted to play with, and that got a lot of views. So, we're helping to diminish the attention span of the next generation with under 60-second clips as well. So you can find all those as well at our various platforms as well. All right, so chapter 6 next time, and hopefully you're enjoying this book as much as we are, and you'll join us to see what exactly those classical apologists are talking about. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.